And here we are, episode 19, I believe.
19, yeah. Yeah, we actually checked the number this time. So
Exactly. So it's the Labor Day weekend here in Queensland, Australia.
okay.
So when Australia went down to the 8-hour day, that went from sort of a 10-hour day to an 8-hour day. Naturally, we celebrated having less work by having a day off,
Okay.
which is I think it's just perfect.
Right, yeah. I think our Labor Day is in a different month altogether. So
Even Australian states, it varies quite a lot. I think. Yes,
oh really?
yes,
Okay, yes. Yeah,
yes,
you mentioned Queensland, so some other state might be different.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but as Australians, we do have a bit of a wry sense of humour, the Australian sense of humour. And we had a prime minister that disappeared while swimming, presumed
Hmm.
dead. And so we created a memorial swimming pool for him. That's actually true. There's the Harold Holt
Interesting.
Memorial Swimming Pool. I've actually been there. So, yep. Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
Bit of a dry sense of humour. So I think that having a day off to celebrate getting less work seems to be like the same sort of thing. Bit of a dry sense of humour. So.
Right. All right.
Uh,
So what are we talking about today?
All right, so I've got a couple of topics. One is women only areas, and the other one is a category I've opened up in the wiki in the last few months: what men do.
Okay.
Because there are lots of amazing things that men are doing out there, and so I'm collating some of them. Shall we
All
start
right.
with women only?
Let's start with that. What are your thoughts right now?
So this is a bit topical at the moment because it's just been announced that a residential tower in London is going to be women only. Now, apparently, it's being reserved for homeless women and probably also, I suspect, victims of domestic violence and so forth. But it is women only, so no men welcome in this tower. And many feminists and others have proclaimed this, a great victory and how wonderful it is that the women won't have to fear in the tower. So this thing it makes it quite topical because a lot of people don't realise how common women only areas are. Now, whenever this topic comes up, everyone always mentions gyms. Okay, probably women only gyms. They're pretty much everywhere, and they are highly visible. It makes sense that that's what people would remember. But there are all sorts of categories that I think people don't know about. And jump in if you have any thoughts on this. Otherwise, I'll just go
Oh well.
through a few of the examples.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
So obviously, domestic violence shelters and gyms, both very well known. A lot of people don't know that there are already hotel floors that are women only, and there's a prediction in the hotel industry that women's only hotels will appear before long. Now, I will jump in on almost none of the examples I'm going to give have an equivalent for men. It is actually true, though, that there are a very small number of men-only hotels and residential hotels around the world. There are, of course, residential colleges and so forth that are men-only or women-only. But in terms of hotels and so forth and places where you can stay generally commercially, there are actually a couple of examples around the world. There's actually a holy mountain in Greece where there are a number of monasteries and only men can stay at most of those monasteries. In fact, famously, there was a man who it is reputed who lived his entire life as a monk, and it is reputed that he never saw a woman. Obviously, others, excluding obviously his own mother, but obviously he's too young to remember. But other than that, he never actually saw a woman. So the story goes. So there are a couple. So there are some monasteries there that only men can stay at, and there's also a sort of a church in Jerusalem that runs a bit of a hostel for men. I believe men can stay for free at that hostel. So there's one or two examples, but there are many examples of women only hotels and hotel floors and soon to be hotels.
Right. Yeah. One thing I'm just thinking about right now is something that actually HBR Talk, Honey Badger Radio, recently kind of brought up is in Japan they're trying to do the whole women only trains thing because of uh, the allegation. I note that it is allegation as far as I'm concerned, not proof that there's like a sexual harassment problem in trains. Because they're so crowded, so allegations could be rather rife.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's right. And actually, and public transport is actually on my list. Actually, so
Okay, let's do that.
yep, cool. All right, so all right, so public transport is one that is very, very common. Actually, so there are women-only bus seats in Switzerland and India. There are women-only train carriages in Malaysia, Germany, and other countries. And I'll sounds like I have to add Japan to the list. There's apparently been some proposals for women-only seating on aircraft, which is interesting. I've taken notes on this over a number of years, so I'd actually forgotten that. That's in my notes. And apparently men not permitted to travel on some trains during certain hours in Chennai in India. Now, it's interesting you mentioned about that the women are making allegations there of sexual assault and so forth. Of course, the men are at risk of false allegations there as well. So I personally would be okay if there were male and female carriages, but so often, because then the men will also have an opportunity to be in a male-only area if that's what they prefer. But what so often we see is women-only carriages and general carriages. So the men have never had that opportunity to be in a men-only environment if they prefer, if they're worried about false allegations, for example. So
Right.
It's always I'm always both or neither when it comes to these things. If society decides that single sex train carriages are something that they need, fine, but they need to be both, in my view. Right. And of course, that's before we even get on to transgenderism, which is breaking down a lot of previous barriers, and of course raising the question exactly about who gets to sit in the women-only carriage.
Exactly, and just like you, I'm first and foremost conscious about the double standard about any given thing, right? So if you want to declare one thing is for women, then it's got to be for men too, and so forth.
Exactly, that's right. And as I said, there may be, well, we know at least with toilets and so forth, there are situations where societies have said, yes, this is what we should do. Fine, we'll have both. So in addition to the ones we've mentioned already, markets, there's a women-only market has recently opened in London. Music concerts. Now, there was something called the Statement Festival in Sweden. The event was non-men, and that's actually a page I've put in Wiki for Men, actually non-men, because the world is now divided into men and non-men. Right. So this event was open only to non-men. And interestingly enough, there were actually men at the event by virtue of the fact that many of the people working there were men, and they actually had sort of a backstage area for the men. This festival was actually found to be in violation of the Sweden's discrimination laws. And it isn't clear, as I understand it, went ahead and later on they found it in violation. It isn't clear whether there have been any more. The one and only event that I know about was in 2018. It isn't clear whether they've been able to hold any more. Nightclubs, there's something called the Lick Club, which I think is a really interesting and strange name. But anyway, the Lick Club is a women-only club in the UK. It originally operated as a sort of temporary events where it'd be raves and so forth and wouldn't have a permanent establishment. I understand it does actually have a permanent establishment now. So there are parking spaces and roads in many countries: Australia, China, Kuwait, Malaysia, Indonesia, Austria, Italy, and South Korea have women-only parking spaces. In some cases, in some countries, the women-only parking spaces are larger, and the feminists have proclaimed that to be sexist. So, and obviously they're almost always closer to the entrance to the facility. It's apparently very common in Germany. Yes, so apparently the one town in Germany, there were been a few cases like this, but one particular town, the town of Triberg in Germany, created male-only and female-only parking spaces and allocated the more difficult parking spaces to men. So, apparently they're under feminist pressure, but it isn't clear whether they backtracked on that.
Exactly.
There was a UK company that. Sorry, you go ahead.
No. It's okay. I wonder how feminists will like it if you just call them disabled people instead of women. Yeah.
Well, exactly, and in actual fact, in some cases, you do see list of special categories and say physical disabilities, and various minorities, women. So it's being listed alongside disabilities in a lot of cases now. So an insurance company in the UK suggested road lanes exclusively for female drivers. I figured that was never really going to go anywhere, and I'm not completely sure they were serious, but the very fact they even said it and they got some support from feminists. And apparently, South Korea is removing women-only parking spaces and converting them into gender-neutral family parking spaces, which, of course, we have in Australia. Actually, it's for decades, and of course, I forget it. I mean, I did live overseas for a number of years, but it's there are a few things we do here in Australia that aren't as common overseas. One is family rooms. They're not mothers' rooms. They've been family rooms for as long as I can remember, and I'm in my 50s.
Yeah.
There are parking spaces at virtually every shopping centre for people who have small children with them. And I certainly used them when I had my daughter with me when she was young. And of course, it's useful in that case because you really are getting, strollers out and so forth. And it is good to be close to the shopping centre. So, but yeah, in Australia, those sort of things have always been gender neutral.
Exactly. Yeah. And America has them too. Right? There's a family room and everything like that. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. Because I'm trying to think. My daughter was born in Canada, and I think in Canada there might have been some mothers' rooms. But yeah, it wasn't. I don't think family rooms were as common at the time because that was a while back now. So,
right.
Yeah. No, that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear because there are, and this is something we talk about traditionalism too. I mean, traditionally men were involved in the upbringing of their children a lot, and would have been clear, 500,000 years ago would have been dealing with small children who needed various things done for them. So next one I've got on my list is police stations. There are women-only police stations in Brazil, Argentina, Guatemala, Peru, and India. Interestingly enough, Australian academics have been studying the Argentinian model because Argentina is obviously a country we really want to emulate, apparently.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a bit of a facepalm when I read that. And so, they're looking at introducing women-only police stations in Australia. And those stations would have female police officers and specialist domestic violence services and so forth, which obviously which will completely exclude men. So they won't have access to any of those services.
Right.
Yeah. Private clubs is another one. So this is a big one here too, because there have been traditionally a lot of men's clubs and women's clubs. That's the British influence, I suppose, too. I suppose, does the US have many men's clubs and women's clubs? Is that something that you do?
Well, I think we still have that problem of men's spaces being eroded. So it's like, if we have them, they might be in jeopardy or they've been already gone. That's just my understanding of it. So
that's what we're seeing here. And I don't know much about the situation in the UK where this idea came from, but I suspect it's probably pretty similar. We've traditionally had a lot of clubs where only men could be members, and others, the member could bring along guests, which could include women. And there were women's clubs. And in fact, some of the women's clubs have been more exclusive than the men's clubs. And this is exactly what we've seen, and I am sure it's the same in the UK too, and other countries, where the men's clubs have been forced or coerced into opening up membership to women, but the women's clubs continue to be single sex. So we have in the town near I live, there's a club called the Moreton Club, very, very exclusive, women's only organisation. And even though other relatively exclusive men's clubs have been forced to open their doors to women, the Moreton Club continues to be single sex. And I have to say, having looked at a lot of these organisations, the Moreton Club is far more exclusive than any of the men's clubs ever were. Public spaces, they're actually in some cases public women-only seating, even in parks and so forth. On Wiki for Men page, I've actually got a picture that somebody else took of that actually in Australia. So in Melbourne, ladies-only seating, which I thought was fabulous. The way they wrote it. It was obviously done decades ago, but they've left it in place. And we've got restaurants. There are actually a number of women's only restaurants around. I'm unaware of any men's only restaurants or anything like that. As I said, when it comes to accommodation, yes, occasionally there are men's only facilities outside of colleges, but I'm unaware of anything like restaurants, swimming pools, and of course taxis and ride sharing services. That's a big one.
Yeah, I think taxis and ride-sharing services. So I think that could be grouped in with the buses, but they're more closed in. So they're more granularized, I think. So
Yeah, I think I used to originally have them categorized or looking for men with public transport and ended up separating them out. But there are a number of women-only services. A number of those women-only services have had trouble getting female drivers because only a minority of rideshare drivers and taxi drivers are women. I think it's even lower among taxi drivers. And a number of the rideshare services, as I said, have had trouble sourcing sufficient female drivers to be able to actually maintain the number of number of services that they want. But nevertheless, there are a number of them around. My hypothesis or my thought on this is that since most ride-sharing services let people sign up for multiple services at once and they don't insist on any exclusivity, there's no real problem with being a driver for one of these services if you're a woman. So I suspect if something like Uber required exclusivity, I think it would destroy these smaller services, including the single-sex services. But because they don't, I suspect that the women can just sign up for Uber, sign up for the other one, and take rides with whoever it happens to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
The only last two I've got on my list are university classes and co-working spaces.
Right. Well, we already heard an example of the university classes because we talked with Tina, the transmaxer, and we heard her story about actually becoming, identifying as female and then actually getting access to that science class.
Exactly. That's right. That was good. It's good to hear that actually. And yeah, she had mentioned that before. So, it's as we said before, and this comes down. That's right on the key point. The trans movement is just completely shaking all this up. Feminists have been pushing for these things for probably 50 years now, and it's just being swept away in a matter of years. We're talking 2-3 years. A lot of this has been swept away. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, we're still seeing it. We're going to see it some more. It's going to be interesting to look at. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're paying attention to this for good reason. So.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a huge social change, and I wonder whether most people out there have recognised how important it is and how big it is. No society's ever done anything like this before, so we're actually in some sort of huge social experiment at the moment.
Yeah, to be sure.
Yeah. So anyway, in any case, I will leave my women-only page up, even if those sort of women-only spaces are being eroded. It would be interesting to see like when you mentioned, new attempts to doing say train carriages, whether to what extent that will ever get off the ground, given that in most countries now, or many countries, a man can simply declare himself to be a woman and gain access to those services.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Now, first comment. I've noticed you talking about the men that hold up that no man concert, right? So because there's always men behind the scenes that have to actually run the infrastructure and like get everything running. So men hold up the no man spaces.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
You go on.
No. I'm just saying that none of this anti-male stuff is possible if men's. It's not just that men let it happen; they hold it up. They're the ones putting in the labor. So this should be in the character of what men shouldn't do.
Yes, I agree. That's right. Yeah. And if men refused to support that, there wouldn't have been a festival. And this is precisely the problem, of course, if what would happen if, say, a virus swept through and affected men far more than women, and most men became sick and couldn't work or something. There are many jobs, which we call invisible jobs, where there simply aren't enough women trained in those areas to maintain the infrastructure. And it doesn't even speak to the desire. A lot of those industries have had a great deal of trouble recruiting women. But even if there were women who realised the need and stepped up immediately to take the place while the men were down, say I don't know, in science fiction we see all the men died or something like that, or most of the men died. If in a situation like that, even if there were enough women willing to step up, which I personally have to say I really question whether that would be the case, but if there were, it would take years to train them, and there wouldn't be enough women trained in those roles to maintain the infrastructure in the intervening time. And this is we saw this in a microcosm in the Statement Festival. I think that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And more broadly in society, we need men. We all are dependent on men. So if anybody says they're independent, unless they're living in the bush and hunting their own and farming their own food, they're not independent.
Yeah.
Exactly. Man or woman. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But this kind of leads me to something else. A bit of a complaint about certain ways of advocating for men, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like some people kind of talk about the value of men as on the basis that they are needed for society. Well, is that really like it's true, it's a detail, but should that be like the first reason? We need you, so you better be a man.
It's very gynocentric, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, that's right. And I've personally tried to refrain from framing arguments in those. So I'll say society needs men, okay, which is a statement of fact, right?
Yes.
But
right.
I won't.
It's detail.
Right. But I won't advocate for an improvement of men's lot on that basis because, in fact, I would love women to participate more in mining and road work. And I mean, I would be good. It really would be good. So a lot of those men, they're not always that well paid. Sometimes they are, but they're not even always that well paid. And they're hard and dirty and sometimes dangerous jobs. So, I would absolutely love to see the entire adult population bearing that burden. So,
exactly.
So it can be a fine line, though, absolutely.
Well, yeah, sure. And, when it comes to these kind of things, it's the women that, that said, well, I don't want to do this job because I can't do it. I'm too weak. And they said, oh, okay, you don't have to do it. We men will handle it because I guess we kind of have to. So that's the way it's been. But anytime that there's some kind of quota initiative to actually get these women into these fields, they blame men for having kept them out.
Yeah, that's the part that bothers me exactly. And that isn't true. And in fact, many of those industries have affirmative action programs for women. And I also have to say, and just personally, having spoken to men in many blue-collar industries, the vast majority of them have actually said they would really be happy to see more women involved and would welcome them. When I have seen women involved in those sort of roles, they tended to be, what I've seen is that they are welcomed as well. So I think this whole idea that the feminists use it as an excuse to say that women are being excluded when that isn't true at all, both officially with the programs and I think even informally.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another point I wanted to make, commenting on this whole thing, was that I mentioned that I kind of joke that women are fall into the disabled category, right? Well, so going to things like women's sports. See, I don't make fun of things like the Special Olympics, of course. I don't make fun of them, but should we consider women's sports a Special Olympics category?
No. Just as you were saying it, I thought, oh dear, I never thought of that. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. How are these women like that?
Exactly. That's right. Feminism just leads to these sort of absurdities, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, gynocentrism in general, because like we've been talking about over and over again, we have these conservative women kind of complaining about how women's sports are being invaded and everything like that.
That's right.
So, since when did they start defending this kind of stuff? When did these men start defending this kind of stuff?
I know that was a rhetorical question, but I have to say, I would say probably the last 3 years. That's my feeling. That's my observation. That we have a news program on a news channel here called Sky News. Actually, I think it's owned by the same organisation as Sky News in the UK. Anyway, they were openly anti-feminist until about 3 years ago, and with the rise of the trans movement. Recently on Sky News, this is about a year ago, they actually had a radical feminist on the show using the word mansplaining repeatedly. And all these people who have watched Sky News for years are basically saying, since when do you have a radical feminist on saying mansplaining? They've absolutely flipped. They literally flipped to the other side. And they've suddenly aligned themselves with feminists. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Right. So this is why I think pointing the finger at feminism alone is not useful anymore. We have to be more broadly anti-gynocentric.
Absolutely, we do. That's right. And absolutely. And feminism is really in free fall now. So we did talk about this, of course. Over the years, we said, "Oh, there'll be a time." Well, that time is now. Absolutely. I think feminism is maybe not done, but it's taken a heavy hit. And yes, absolutely, we should be focusing more on broader gynocentrism, including traditional gynocentrism. Absolutely.
Exactly. I mean, simple, plain old anti-feminism is it's too narrow, and we should know that just because they're anti-feminism doesn't mean they're for men. We've said this many times over, but we need to remind people all the time.
That's right. Absolutely. That's right. Yes, interesting times ahead. I mean, many of us I don't know if you were there, Vernon. I think you were in one of our internal channels, but I don't know if you were active at the time. But there was a discussion briefly about this, and a few of us were just shaking our heads and saying how we could not have predicted a few years ago that feminism would be in freefall now, the way it is. Absolutely extraordinary. Yeah, it seemed unassailable even 5 years ago in many ways. Or I thought we'd chip away at it, but there were a lot of people who just were afraid it was unassailable. Here we are. Exactly. It's great. Yes. Yeah, but yes. And but you're right, we've got a bigger battle to fight now. So
yeah, right. This reminds me of something. Recently I caught Paula Wright's remark about how gynocentrism is just the men's version of patriarchy theory. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Oh yes. So it's absolutely okay. Yeah, I've heard that argument before, and no, there are just many. There are just simply many ways in which there's no alignment there. I've actually done a page, or been developing a page, Feminism versus Men's Rights, and comparing the differences. I think what I might do is develop a page, Gynocentrism versus Patriarchy, actually, and just compare the basically talk about how they're not just a mirror image of each other, but yes, this is an argument that people have tried to put forward in the past.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's too demonstrable.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've written a lot on discrediting patriarchy. Gynocentrism is easily recognizable in society, and there are many ways in which we do that. I mean, all you have to do is watch the videos where there's a male and a female actor playing acting domestic violence in a public place, and when the man's hitting the woman, you have men stepping in. And when the woman's hitting the man, you've actually got women cheering on in some cases.
Right.
I mean, gynocentrism is in many ways just about those double standards.
Gotcha. So, if I want to shift gears here, we've got on Twitter I threw in throw some questions and feedback for today's goalpost thing, nice. So we've got so we know Baron von Brass, right? Yeah.
Who was that?
Sorry. You had an interview with him recently, Baron von Brass.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes.
He's gonna love how you had to kind of fight to remember.
Yeah, no, sorry. I thought you said grass. Actually.
Okay, I'll just call him grass then. Yeah. All right. So he actually has a pretty lengthy question, actually.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go. Feminists say men occupy top of society. The problem is that they seem to be going too broad in specifics, like how people claim blacks are better than whites at running. They fail to consider that men at the top, like black Olympic runners, often have more things in common than that. In case of blacks, once you really delve deeper into the Olympic runners, you find a lot of them come from one small Ethiopian town called Bikoji. For men at the top, they tend to be older, taller, better health, etc. It just shows just broadening it to men isn't helpful. Thoughts on that?
Apex fallacy would be the first thing that comes to mind, where people tend to view a group by its most successful members. That's something that happens with men a lot. Yes, he did actually mention a little bit about this, which I do find interesting, and I wasn't really aware of before, that apparently, yes, there are a lot of the best runners apparently come from particular or have a heritage of a particular part of Africa, which is interesting because I did know that there were some genetic reasons to do with fast and slow twitch fibers in the muscles. And I guess that is also a form of apex fallacy, and you just assume that, say, all black men are good runners or something. In actual fact, that's not likely to be true, or they're going to be all good long distance runners or something, and that's not likely to be true because, particularly when you consider that most genetic diversity in the human species comes from Africa, so is only in Africa. So Africa is an extremely diverse place, and you're going to have people who are have a wide variety of different characteristics there. So yes, I think that makes perfect sense. And in terms of, but I guess more broadly, yes, apex fallacy is what we see, particularly for men.
Exactly. I think in popular culture, it's Kenyans that are the fast runners and stuff like that. But it's interesting that Ethiopia is like the big one here. So it kind of throws a wrench into that stereotype.
Yeah, we might even have an observer bias where we see Kenyans turning up and running and winning particular sorts of races, but within Kenya, it might be that they're all coming from one province or something, so one state or whatever. So yeah, exactly. We wouldn't see it because they're all getting selected for the national team.
Yeah,
right. There's an observer bias.
Yeah, and you know, when it comes to like the Caucasian population, so we have some image of the Caucasians like in the Western world, or like in like English speaking countries, right? But then in the Nordic countries, they're much larger, they're taller, they're stronger. So,
well, that's right. Within all across the world, there are huge variations like that. Exactly, yeah, that's right. Nordic people being on average quite tall, whereas if you look at some groups in say Southern Europe, the average height may be quite a bit less.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I as a general rule, I mean, I'm forced to use it sometimes just to describe certain topics, but as a general rule, I don't go around describing people as black or white.
Yeah.
Occasionally I do. I have to. Yeah. But there's actually a huge amount of variation. And if you look across Eurasia, and you don't even have to go there, because I've been to bits and pieces of Eurasia, but I certainly haven't crossed it from east to west, right?
Yeah.
But if you go and find pictures of people from Tajikistan or something, or Uzbekistan or something, right? Or some of the eastern parts of Russia, and you go, well, they kind of look Asian and Western, or white, they're somewhere in between. And this is the thing, it's actually a continuum. As you go, the physical characteristics that we would recognize as being associated with particular groups, they actually are gradiated across the whole continent of Eurasia.
Right, yeah. And in other cases, like say, like some Icelandic people kind of look Japanese sometimes, almost. Like
interesting.
Like you know the pop singer Bjork.
Yeah, she does. All right, actually, yes.
She really does look kind of Japanese, doesn't she? Well, as it turns out, northern Japanese people have some ancestry from the Nordic countries, actually, from Iceland.
Right. Yeah. There's been some ancient contact there or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and Southern Japanese has more in common with more ancestral lineage from I think China. I think so. I think that's my understanding of it. So, yeah.
Well, that makes sense in particular.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think I believe that on my mother's side, I'm from the northern Japanese side in terms of heritage. I think.
Right. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. That's yeah. And it's nice to know that sort of thing actually, for at a personal level. Yeah. Exactly. So, I guess probably diverting a little bit in our topic, but I find, ancient contact between different groups is really interesting topic. Now, sometimes it starts to approach the realm of conspiracy theories, but there's some interesting evidence out there about ancient contact. Like the Polynesians across the Pacific almost certainly reached Australia at some point, reached China, and possibly reached South America. And I do recall reading there was some studies, and they had assumed that South American chickens were descended from European chickens, and they had been brought over by Europeans and so forth. But when they did genetic studies on them, now I'm going from memory, it was a number of years I read about this, but when they did genetic studies, they found they were more closely related to Asian chickens, which raised the possibility that they may have come across the Pacific. That they may have, European chickens would have come in as well, but the Asian chickens may have come across the Pacific on Polynesian rafts and so forth. So it may be that the Polynesians picked up chickens in China and ended up depositing them in South America, maybe hundreds of years later or 1,000 years later or something. And so there's that contact. There are other ones. There's a lot of people don't know 14th century Chinese coins turned up in the islands, just Australian islands, just north of the Australian mainland. Now they don't know. That doesn't mean that Chinese people in the 14th century visited Australia, but because the coins might have been old when they got here. But there is some indication. We know there was trade going backwards and forwards. Yeah. But we don't know how early. Maybe the Chinese did make it here in the 14th century or the 16th century. We don't know. It's not recorded. But these sort of ancient movements did happen, and before the 1950s, the idea that Vikings made it to North America would have been fantasy. But we now know that's truly the case, and that in Canada there's an archaeological site with a Viking settlement. They made it. Yeah.
Right.
So, and there's some evidence they may have made it further south. So it's far south of Maryland. They found some evidence to suggest maybe, but that's not conclusive. I personally wouldn't be surprised if they made it. I mean, they're adventurous people. I suspect if they got that far and they had a base in Newfoundland, they probably would have sailed south to see what was there, I suspect. Yeah,
absolutely.
So ancient contact happened.
Of course. Yeah.
So I've got another topic. I don't know if we want to move on to that one.
Yeah, we could do that. And I'd like to do a friendly reminder. I'll have to kind of log off in about 20 minutes to take care of something. So.
Oh, okay, no worries. All right, so why don't we'll keep going until you're ready to finish up.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yep. All right, so the other one I wanted to suggest was, this is a new category I put up on Wikimedia for Men a few months ago. It's what men do. So originally this category was just for men who had participated in rescues and so forth, because let's face it, if you look at a rescue that's going on, the vast majority of people who are involved in the rescue are going to be men. So you look any sort of, if there's a flooding, you've got people stepping in the floodwaters to carry people across. There's some fairly famous photos of men carrying, women and children and so forth across floodwaters. If you look at all these sorts of things, men are massively overrepresented and often the only ones involved. But I've extended it to other areas now, such as some of the great advancements that men have participated in. So I don't know if you've heard of. I think we may have mentioned him really quickly. Boyan Slut, if I could mention.
Yes, the name is familiar. Is he the one who's doing the environmental cleanup?
Exactly, that's right. Ocean cleanup. So he was only 16 when he started this. He's a Dutch inventor, and he's on Wiki. All these people are on Wiki for Men, and he started this the ocean cleanup system which he developed. A lot of people have compared him to Greta Thunberg, who basically just stands around complaining about the environment, and she gets all the fame and gets all the airtime, and poor old Boyan is out there just doing it, just doing fighting the good fight. So just encourage everyone to look into Boyan. So go on.
No. I'm just saying. Well, the good thing about this, if there is such a good thing about this, the good thing about Greta being so more well known is that we can also meme about her.
Yes, this is true. This is true. Exactly.
Yeah.
She's quite memeable, and she is an adult now. When she was a kid, when she was under 18, a lot of her people who disagreed with her went a bit softly. But as soon as she was 18, that's it. And she's 21 or 22 now. So there's no. Old Charlotte Proudman claimed that she was a teenager. No, I think she's 20 actually. Is Greta. Old Charlotte Proudman claimed that she was a teenager recently, and I noticed that she did it. Something that I checked, it was the day before her 20th Greta Thunberg's 20th birthday. So what she said was technically correct on the day that she said it, but she was trying to imply she's a young girl, she's a teenager. Lay off her. No, she's an adult, and she can be held accountable for what she says. So and does. So, and she's in her 20s now. So I said it was the day before her 20th birthday or something. So I thought she'd obviously taken one last opportunity to call her a teenager.
Right.
Next one I wanted to mention was Brendan Grimshaw. So I only found out about Brendan recently. Brendan was a newspaper editor in the UK, and he obviously must have just decided he wanted to do something completely different. And in 1962, he bought an island in the Seychelles for £8,000, or about $10,000 US dollars at the time. And so I don't know, what would that be? Perhaps a few $100,000 now or something along those lines. And it's 24 acres or 9.9 hectares. And he spent decades basically turning it into a nature reserve. So he would, he and with a local volunteer worked on it for decades, built 4.8 kilometers of track. And they did breeding programs for some of the local turtles and so forth. And they made this little island into a beautiful little nature reserve. He died in recently, just looking at the 2012 it was. He died in 2012. And the Seychelles government is maintaining it as a national park. So, so which is great to see. So especially considering Seychelles is so poor. I was a bit concerned that maybe they might have not maintained it after he died, but apparently it's been maintained in the state that he left it in. So, but he was apparently 76, I think, when he died. So anyway, absolutely. And so what men do, I mean, he just spent hours. Sorry, he spent decades on this island, making it into a little. I just think that was fabulous. Such dedication.
Absolutely. Now, or so you say this is a new category in Wiki for Men. So where can you actually find it on the page? If you go to Wiki for Men, where will you find it?
So I'm currently only in the categories. Actually, what I'll do is I'll link some of these on the front people on the front page. Actually,
yeah,
yes, because we need to. The front page hasn't been updated in a while. Actually, so I'll put a few of them on the front page. So some of them are still under development, but some of them are good little explanations of what these guys did.
Yeah, that's actually, I think that would be really helpful. Because we talk about what men do, so let's kind of give them the best access for it.
You're right. Let's make a new category on the front page. We'll do. Yeah. I'll do it right after this call. Actually, after our video.
Sounds good. Yeah. So and with Boy and Slut, perhaps I wonder if it'll be worth it to actually have like a subcategory, what boys do.
Yeah, I actually do have a what boys do category as well.
Oh, good. Good. Okay, all right.
Yes, I do. Yeah. So Boyan's in the what men do now because of his age. But yes, perhaps I should put him. Actually, you know what? I'll put him in both. Actually,
all right.
I'll put him in both. Yeah. So the next one I've got is a man by the name of Cassius Dio. He was a Roman. He was a member of the senatorial class in the Roman Empire. Well, the reason he's on the list is because he wrote a history of 1,000 years of Rome. So 1,000 years of Roman history. And this, I think only some of the document survives, but nevertheless, the amount of information he was able to put into that has been invaluable for modern historians. And I think it's perhaps one of the reasons Rome was quite lucky and they had quite a number of men who were writing extensively. And I think that's the reason we know so much about Roman history. But Cassius Dio was definitely one of these guys. So what men do, he spent decades writing about Roman history and recording things that perhaps otherwise would have been lost to us.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous. And I mean, I'm a bit of a history geek, so I'm obviously going to naturally like that sort of thing. But nevertheless, what he did was just extraordinary.
Absolutely. So one thing I want to kind of note is that in school I was not that great in history. Like I didn't do too well in like those kind of courses. So to the ones that are like me and just didn't have a good time in history class, is there a problem with that? Is there a problem with the way history is taught, or is it just certain people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There probably is a problem with the way history is taught, I suspect. I think most subjects aren't taught very well. I've had an amateur interest in economics for decades, and I took an economics course at university, and it destroyed my interest in economics for several years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that there are problems like that. I guess on the flip side of that, some people just find history interesting, and other people probably don't. I've always been very interested in just how people lived in other eras, and as you get older, of course, to the subtlety. But perhaps when I was younger, I was more interested in kings and whatnot, queens, when you get older, you become more interested in how the common people lived and so forth, and how they thought, and how they how the things they have in common with us and the things that are different from us. So religion was very important in a lot of societies until quite recently. And a lot of people like to think that we're different because of that. But I suspect when you look at a lot of the belief systems that are taking off at the moment, they're quasi-religious anyway. So we don't, the presence of God, a god or gods is not very important in our society. But we've got these quasi-gods, as it were, and that could be feminism, or it might be something else.
Right.
And we've got these philosophies that are quasi-religious in nature, and so I think that we're a lot more like our ancestors than a lot of people are perhaps prepared to admit.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's my feeling on it.
Right. Well, the more I think about it, I think I know what my problem was. I think I was more fascinated with the future and possibilities, and that kind of had a bad influence on my regard for history because it was the world of the old. Because
Yes.
yeah, because you know me, so most people know that I, even for a very young age, I grew up on things like Star Trek. But
Yeah.
I think in Japan there was like a big uh, desire for the future and futurism because of like TV shows like Doraemon. I don't know if you know what Doraemon is.
No, no. I watched
Really,
a few
really.
Japanese shows growing up, but go on. Yeah.
Okay, it's an absolute it's a classic. You'll probably know it when you see it. He's supposed to be a cat, but he has no ears, and he's blue. He's a robot cat.
Oh
Doraemon.
no. You know what?
You don't
Maybe.
know you
You
don't
know
know
what?
him.
Maybe. Go on.
Okay, basically the premise of the show is he comes from the future to help his inventor's ancestor do better at school because in the present that ancestor really is a horrible student and is bad at it, just about everything.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the manga, the show's premise, and he's got this kind of four-dimensional pocket. I think it was four dimension that he brings up like inventions to help him out, and it's mostly played for laughs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's a classic show. It's everybody knows who Doraemon is. But there's this kind of longing for the possibilities of the future. I think this was necessary because of post-war sentiment. Because
Ah.
because of the post-war sentiment, anti-war is huge in the Japanese
Yeah.
popular consciousness. So,
Yeah.
and that includes like a vision of the future. So,
Could there have been a bit of an anti-history aspect going on there too, where people didn't
I
want to
don't
look?
know about anti-history, but I
Okay.
think people are more interested in the future more so because
Yeah.
I definitely would not say anti-history because
Okay.
there's manga trying to explain Japanese history. So there's a
Okay.
lot of energy devoted to that one, but I think that the futurist aspect is much stronger. I think
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And I'm
that's
actually
my
go
impression
on.
of that. Yeah,
I'm actually interested in science fiction too, but I was always interested in history as well. So it's interesting there. I always love both actually. Perhaps everything except the mundane world.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, nowadays I understand the value of history, of course, because we because like you say, we're more alike to our ancestors than we might be prepared to admit.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It is quite interesting actually. So I'm just having a look here about who I had next on my list.
Mhm.
Uh, right. So now I'm going to have trouble pronouncing this gentleman's name. I shall give it a go. He's Senegalese. He's Mbaya Diagne. Probably absolutely butchered his name. Uh, he was a Senegalese military officer who served in Rwanda as a United Nations military observer. And during the Rwanda genocide, he actually undertook many missions to save the lives of civilians. So he wasn't ordered to do this by his superiors. He just used his position as a foreign military officer with the United Nations cap on to rescue civilians, which I think is absolutely amazing, especially given that United Nations soldiers were actually attacked during the Rwanda genocide at times. So it wasn't proof against being attacked at all. So I think this is a young man who we should know more about. And unfortunately, he was killed. It wasn't people being aimed at him, but he was killed by a mortar shell during the conflict on the 31st of May, 1994. So he actually died while he was trying to save people. So. But so his body was repatriated and buried with full military honors in Senegal. So, but anyway, I just wanted to mention him, and I think he's something that's the type of person that we should know more about.
Right.
Yeah. Next on my category. Now, how long have we got? How are we going?
I got about roughly 7 more minutes. We can go a little bit
Okay.
over, but
All
around that
right.
time, I'll have to log off.
No worries. So next one I'm going to mention is actually a relative of mine. His name's
Okay.
actually Archibald Fenner Brockway, and he is my grandfather's second cousin. And I'm a bit of amateur genealogist, and he does appear on so I know where he appears on my family tree. Okay. So you might love this. He was a committed socialist.
Okay.
So he was a British socialist politician, humanist, and anti-war activist. A very interesting character. And he was actually a pacifist, and was jailed in World War I for his pacifism because he refused to fight. But during World War II, when it came to the Spanish Civil War and then World War II, he actually realised that pacifism wasn't going to cut it, and he actually recruited for people to go fight fascists. In both cases, he realised that taking down fascism, true fascism, was more important than his pacifism. So I wonder if he was alive today, whether he'd be a socialist today or not. Perhaps he still would be a committed socialist. I don't know, but very strong character. And there's actually a statue of him in London. And when I went to London some years ago, I took the opportunity to duck out and got a picture with the statue. So
okay,
So anyway, so he's the only one I'm related to who's going to be mentioned. But I think he's a cool kind of fellow. Even if I don't necessarily agree with his socialism, he really stood up for what he believed in, and I think it's really to be respected. So.
That's fair. I mean, we all know a socialist, right? Ernest Belfort Bax, and
That's right.
We mostly talk about good things about him. So.
Yeah, this is a good point. Actually, you're right. Exactly, and it was a different era too. I mean, it'd be interesting to know if he knew. He's a little bit later than Bax. A little bit, probably a little bit later than Bax. But I don't know. I'll check the dates. It'd be interesting to know because they might have moved in the same circles if they overlapped. Archibald Fenner Brockway was a member of the Fabian Society, which is a socialist society that still exists, actually. And I think Bax might have been a member as well, actually. So, you know what? I'm going to check the date that Bax died, see if they overlap. Would be interesting to know. So Archibald Fenner Brockway actually did know George Orwell, Eric Blair, and he actually wrote, when Eric Blair went to fight in Spain, it was Fenner Brockway that wrote him the letter of introduction to present in when he got to the Labour Party forces the socialist forces in Spain. So we know that he knew George Orwell. So he was an interesting character. He was actually involved in the establishing the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which is still actually, I believe, around. And so anyway, very interesting character. So I thought I'd just mention him while we had a few minutes, and I think we'll probably might continue on. I've got a few others to mention. We might continue on next episode. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. You'd almost be out of time, I would imagine.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, well, I think this was a good episode.
I think so. I think we went through a lot of interesting stuff. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. I think I'll let you know if that won't happen, but I think we can. So I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
No worries at all.
2 weeks. I think we can do 2 weeks.
Yeah. No worries at all. All right. Good to see you, Vernon. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talk to you then.
Yeah.
Bye.